All right, get ready to fire up those neurons, because today we are taking a deep dive into Douglas Hofstadter's Gödel, Escher, Bach, and Eternal Golden Braid.
It's a book that's been on my shelf for years, and every time I pick it up, I find something new in it.
It's one of those books that you can't just read once.
Definitely not. Each chapter is like a puzzle box. But it's incredibly rewarding. It ties together these seemingly unrelated fields, math, art, music, and shows how they all connect to this really mind-blowing concept of strange loops.
Yeah, strange loops, that's Hofstadter's bread and butter. It's all about self-reference, but on this whole other level, and it can get pretty meta pretty fast.
Oh, yeah, definitely. But that's part of what makes it so fascinating. It makes you think about thinking in a whole new way.
So to help us unpack all of this, let's start with the first strand of this eternal golden braid Kurt Gödel and his incompleteness theorem.
Right. Which is a mouthful, I know. But it's actually a really profound idea. Before Gödel, mathematicians thought, okay, if we can just find the right set of axioms, these basic mathematical truths, we can build a system where we can prove literally everything.
Like a mathematical theory of everything.
Exactly, a complete and consistent system. But then Gödel came along and kind of threw a wrench in the works.
How so?
Well, his incompleteness theorem basically says that within any formal system, like mathematics, there will always be true statements that you can't actually prove within that system.
So you can have all the right ingredients, but you still can't bake the cake. That's kind of unsettling, isn't it?
It is. And it's not just about math. It has implications for what we can know, period.
It's like trying to catch your own tail, right? It reminds me of that paradox, the Epimenides paradox, the whole "this statement is false" thing.
Yes. That's a great example of how self-reference can create these inescapable loops. And Gödel showed how this applies to mathematics, even with something as seemingly straightforward as numbers.
So how did he do that? How did he prove the unprovable?
It's all about these tangled hierarchies that he talks about. And to illustrate it, Hofstadter uses that great example of mu-mon. It's this string within a formal system he sets up, but on another level.
It's not just a string of symbols, it's a statement about a string of symbols, right?
Exactly. He actually developed a way to represent statements like that within those systems, using numbers. And what's amazing is that this string, mu-on another level, actually represents the statement, mu is a theorem of the MIU system. So he's showing how you can have these self-referential statements embedded within formal systems.
Whoa, that's a lot to wrap your head around. And it has huge implications, don't you think? I mean, if there are true statements we can't prove in math, does that mean there are limits to what we can ever know for sure, even in other areas of life?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Does that mean that there are truths out there in art or music that logic just can't grasp?
It's enough to make your head spin. But in a good way, of course. It's like our brains are wired to understand these complex ideas, these strange loops, but also to realize that there's always more out there, always another level to uncover. Speaking of uncovering levels, let's move on from the world of numbers to the equally mind-bending world of M.C. Escher.
Oh, Escher, he's the perfect example of how these heady concepts we've been talking about can actually manifest visually. You look at something like drawing hands, those hands drawing each other into being, and you can't help but think about those tangled hierarchies we were just discussing with Gödel.
It's like a visual representation of self-reference, isn't it? Each hand creates and is created by the other, this endless loop, and ascending and descending. Oh man, those poor monks walking up and down those impossible staircases, that one really messes with your head.
It's incredible. Escher was a master at playing with our perceptions. He makes us question what we perceive as the figure and the crown. Like, is it a vase or is it two faces? Are those birds or are they fish?
You almost get lost in those images trying to figure out which way is up, which is real.
Exactly. He takes those limitations of perspective and turns them into art. And when you think about it, it's like he's visually representing those levels we were talking about with Gödel, where one bleeds into the next. And you know where this leads us?
Hit me.
Straight into the musical genius of Johann Sebastian Bach.
Oh man, this is where I think Hofstadter's brilliance truly shines. I mean, who would have thought to connect something as structured and mathematical as Bach's compositions to these ideas of self-reference and strange loops, and yet it just works so well.
And the thing is, he makes it so accessible too. It's not like he's just lecturing at you. He uses dialogues and stories, and it becomes this journey of discovery. Like, remember the ant fugue, where you've got these little ants, each following their simple rules, but together they create this amazingly complex colony.
I love that analogy. It's like a light bulb moment where you suddenly see how intelligence, or at least complex behavior, can emerge from these simpler systems.
Right. And you see it everywhere, not just in ant colonies. Think about a massive flock of birds all moving together in these intricate patterns. It's mesmerizing. It's as if the flock itself has a kind of intelligence, even though each bird is just following a few simple rules.
It's like the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. You see that in nature all the time.
It's what Hofstadter calls nearly decomposable systems. And it's not just nature, right? Our brains, societies, even the internet, they're all examples of this. But here's the thing. These systems, they're more than just the sum of their parts.
Right. There's something about the interaction, the way they all come together, that creates something totally new.
And sometimes that interaction can even lead to limitations.
Oh, like what?
Well, take decision procedures, for example. It seems intuitive that you could create some foolproof method for determining if any given statement is true or false. But Church's theorem shows us that's actually impossible. It's like there's a fundamental limit to what we can compute, even within a system as airtight as mathematics.
So even with all our fancy algorithms and computers, there is some truth that will always remain out of reach.
It seems that way, yeah. But, I don't see it as discouraging. Think about it. Escher's art wouldn't be nearly as interesting if it didn't play with those limitations of perspective. He uses those limitations to create something beautiful and thought-provoking.
I love that. It's like he's saying, yeah, there are limitations, but within those limitations, there's a whole world of creativity and possibility.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good lesson for us when we think about these big, heady concepts. We might not be able to grasp everything fully, but that doesn't mean we can't appreciate the beauty and complexity of it all.
It reminds me of that quote, I think it was by Richard Feynman, who said something like, I think I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics.
Right. But that doesn't mean we should just give up and say, oh, well, it's all too complicated. It's about embracing the mystery,
Yeah, totally. It's about recognizing that our minds aren't just bound by logic and formal systems. We have
Yeah.
this incredible capacity for intuition, for making these leaps of understanding that go beyond what any algorithm could ever do. It's like Hofstadter is saying that our brains aren't just capable of understanding these strange loops.
They're practically built on them.
Exactly.
It's like self-reference is woven into the very fabric of our being.
Which is a pretty wild thought when you really let it sink in.
It is. And Hofstadter takes that idea even further.
Oh, yeah.
He starts exploring the possibility of artificial intelligence through this lens of self-referential structures.
Okay, now we're getting into some really interesting territory.
Right. Like, could we, he asks,
Yeah.
could we create a machine that not only thinks, but understands its own thinking? Could we imbue a machine with that same tangled hierarchy that we find in our own consciousness?
I mean, that's the holy grail of AI, isn't it? Creating a machine that can truly think for itself.
It is, and it's a question that has captivated philosophers and scientists for centuries.
Didn't Hofstadter also talk about the work of Alan Turing? You know, the guy who basically invented the computer.
He did. He dives into the whole Turing test thing,
Right, trying to figure out if a machine can actually fool a human into thinking it's another person.
Exactly. But what I find so fascinating is that Hofstadter goes beyond just the technical aspects of AI.
He's not just asking, can we build it? He's asking, should we?
Well, even more than that, he's really grappling with the philosophical questions.
Which are?
Like, can a machine truly be said to think in the same way we do?
Right, is it really thinking, or is it just really good at following instructions?
Exactly. And can it feel emotions? Can it appreciate a good back fugue?
Okay, those are tough questions. I'm not sure I've ever seen a robot shed a tear during a Bach concert.
Me neither. But it really makes you think, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, it seems like Hofstadter is saying that intelligence, true intelligence, it's not just about processing information or following algorithms.
It's about something more.
Something that goes beyond logic and computation.
Yes. He reminds us that intelligence also includes things like intuition, creativity, even a sense of humor.
Oh man, speaking of humor, remember that hilarious dialogue where the crab is trying to teach Achilles how to compose music?
Oh, yeah, by writing down mathematical formulas.
Yes. Poor Achilles trying so hard to find the equation for a beautiful melody.
It's brilliant. It's like Hofstadter's poking fun at the idea that we can reduce something as complex as creativity to mere numbers and symbols.
Exactly. He's basically saying, look, we can analyze and dissect and categorize to our heart's content.
But there will always be something more.
Something that defies easy explanation.
And you know what? maybe that's okay.
Maybe that's what makes life and consciousness itself so endlessly fascinating.
It's the mystery. That's what keeps us coming back for more.
So, after this incredible deep dive into Gödel, Escher, Bach, where does this leave us? What's the takeaway for our listeners?
Well, if I had to sum it up, I'd say this. The next time you find yourself feeling small or insignificant, just remember.
Yeah.
Remember that you, dear listener, are a walking, talking, strange loop.
We contain multitudes.
We do. We're capable of contemplating our own existence, the vastness of the universe, and everything in between. So embrace the mystery. Keep asking those big questions.
And who knows what other mind-bending wonders you might discover along the way.